Recently, the latest DP-300 exam dumps are new updated for your Administering Relational Databases on Microsoft Azure exam. You can get real DP-300 questions and answers to practice for your exam preparation. You are guaranteed to pass your Microsoft DP-300 exam successfully with the new update version. Questions 1. You are evaluating the business goals. Which feature should you use to provide customers with the required level of access based on their service agreement? A. Dynamic data masking. B. Conditional access in Azure. C. Service principals. D. Row-level security, RLS. Answer: D. Questions 2. You need to provide an implementation plan to configure data retention for Research DB1. The solution must meet the security and compliance requirements. What should you include in the plan? A. Configure the deleted databases settings for Research SRVOL. B. Deploy and configure an Azure backup server. C. Configure the advanced data security settings for Research DBL. D. Configure the manage backup settings for Research SRVOL. Answer: D. Questions 3. What should you implement to meet the disaster recovery requirements for the PaaS solution? A. Availability zones. B. Failover groups. C. Always-on availability groups. D. Geo-replication. Answer: B. Questions 4. What should you use to migrate the PostgreSQL database? A. Azure Data Box. B. As Copy. C. Azure Database Migration Service. D. Azure Site Recovery. Answer: C. Questions 5. Based on the PaaS prototype, which Azure SQL database compute tier should you use? A. Business Critical 4V Core. B. Hyperscale. C. General Purpose VV Core. D. Serverless. Answer: A. Question 6. Which windowing function should you use to perform the streaming aggregation of the sales data? A. Sliding. B. Hopping. C. Session. D. Tumbling. Answer: D. Question 7. You need to design a data retention solution for the Twitter feed data records. The solution must meet the customer sentiment analytics requirements. Which Azure storage functionality should you include in the solution? A. Time-based retention. B. Change feed. C. Lifecycle management. D. Soft delete. Answer: C. Questions 8. You have an Azure SQL database. You identify a long-running query. You need to identify which operation in the query is causing the performance issue. What should you use to display the query execution plan in Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, SSMS? A. Live query statistics. B. An estimated execution plan. C. An actual execution plan. D. Client statistics. Answer: C. Questions 9. You have several Azure SQL databases on the same Azure SQL database server in a resource group named Resource Group 1. You must be alerted when CPU usage exceeds 80% for any database. The solution must apply to any additional databases that are created on the Azure SQL server. Which resource type should you use to create the alert? A. Resource groups. B. SQL servers. C. SQL databases. D. SQL virtual machines. Answer: C. Questions 10. You have an instance of SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines that has a database named DB1. You plan to implement Azure SQL DataSync for DB1. Which isolation level should you configure? A. Serializable. B. Snapshot. C. Read uncommitted. D. Read committed. Answer: B.